on his cable show.
Yes.
And
All right. Okay. So we're going. Well, Bob Shieffer, this is like, as Yogi would say, deja vu all over again.
well, I owe it all to you, Bobbie. I mean, as I say in the book, I had come back from Vietnam when I was working for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. You invited me out to be on the Channel 5 noon talk show. And after that, Channel 5 offered me a job, and it was $20 a week more than I made at the paper, so I took it. That's where it all started. That's how I got into TV.
But you know, I always tell people that you were a journalistic talent just waiting to be discovered for television. It would have happened without me.
Well, I did it for the money because it was $20 a week more than I made at the paper, and I needed the $20.
Well, here we are. That was in 66, was it not?
1966.
Yes. And so here we are, many years later, many decades later. We started out as a couple of pups together. Now we're a couple of old war horses. But as you look back on those early days at Channel 5, do you have a favorite recollection?
Well, I'll tell you the most embarrassing thing that happened to me while I was there, and there was a hurricane, and I went down to the coast, and I was working with a cameraman, Floyd Bright, I think it was, and we filmed some stuff, and then I drove back, got in time to do the 6 o'clock news, and that went just fine, and everybody complimented me on the report that I brought back. But by the time the 10 o'clock news came by, I had not had any sleep, and I did the first part of the broadcast, and then we went to the commercial break, and I fell sound asleep. Unfortunately, nobody in the control room saw it, and they came right back to me, and I'm just sitting there on camera just like this. And finally, the stage manager woke me up, and I was just humiliated. And I knew when I went back to the newsroom that I'd be getting a lot of angry phone calls. Well, apparently, most of our viewers had gone to sleep by then too, because I only got one or two. But I'll never forget it.
Bob, your book is such a wonderful read. This just in, what I couldn't tell you on TV, and already has gotten on the New York Times bestseller list, and will be moving up, I'm sure, each week. As you were writing the book and all these recollections flooded into your mind and your memory, was there any one thing that you could say was your proudest moment, or the thing you are most proud of?
You know, the thing I'm most proud of is the way CBS and everybody who worked at CBS handled 9/11. This was the hardest story that any of us had ever covered because it was about us. We were under attack. Our families were at risk. Every single reporter in New York who went to Ground Zero that day that worked for CBS News had a near-death experience. The director who directed the coverage for the first hour thought his own daughter had been killed. The youngest member of our CBS Evening News staff watched on television from the newsroom where she was working as the plane hit the tower where her father was working, and she never saw him again. Myself, I was headed up to the U.S. Capitol in Washington when our bureau chief called me and said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm right at the foot of Capitol Hill trying to get through this traffic." And she said, "Get out of there. We think there's another plane headed to Washington, and they think this one is coming to the Capitol." Well, that was the plane that those passengers forced down in Pennsylvania. So had it not been for what they did, I might not be here today to talk about it. It was a very difficult story. It was very personal, and those of us who were involved will just never forget it. But I've never been prouder of CBS News, and I've never been prouder to be a journalist, or for that matter, to be an American, as I was that day.
Don Hewitt has announced that he's going to retire at age 80. Do you hope to go one better than 80 and surpass Don Hewitt?
Well, I don't know. Don has a pretty good deal worked out. I think he's going to, once he does retire, he's going to have a contract that takes him to age 90 to act in some capacity for CBS, so that's probably a pretty good deal. Bobbie, I think I'm just kind of taking it one story at a time now. I'll be 66 years old this year. I still get a kick out of doing this. It's still fun, and that's what I hope young people who read this book and are thinking about going into journalism will come away from it. one of the most important factors you should consider in deciding, I think, what you're going to do with your life is it fun? Is it something that I enjoy doing? And I've enjoyed this, and I still enjoy it. If it gets to the point when I'm no longer curious, when it's no longer fun, well, then I guess I'll quit. But unless I get involuntarily retired, and that might happen, and if so, that's fine, I'm going to keep doing it.
What would you do if you weren't doing broadcast journalism?
Oh, probably go door to door, I suppose. I've always been one of the people that whenever I just love to get news. I love to talk to newsmakers. I love to be at big events. And one of the reasons I never wanted to work at 60 Minutes is it takes 2 or 3 months to get those stories together, and I just can't keep a secret that long. That was a hard thing for me doing this book. When I have a story, I have a bad reputation of running around the newsroom and telling people about it even before it's on the evening news that night. So that was the hard part for me. I just love this, and it's always been fun. It was fun when I was 20 years old, driving a little mobile unit for KXOL, a little radio station in Fort Worth, and it's still fun to me today.
You have covered several presidents.
Yep.
As you look back on the presidents, taking each one individually, in a sentence or two, how would you characterize that president and your covering that president?
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought Nixon was without doubt the most peculiar person that I have ever covered. He was this very private man who was always afraid someone might touch him, and he used to tell his aides, even when he was out of public office and he was traveling on airplanes, sit in the outside seat. I don't want people touching me. Now, this was a man in the most public of all professions, and yet he was so very private. Gerald Ford, without question, the nicest person from a personal standpoint that I have ever known in public life. Jimmy Carter, a very religious man. I sometimes think that part of Jimmy Carter's problem as a politician was his religious background. He sometimes thought that if you cast your bread upon the waters and it's the right thing, it'll take care of itself. Well, even when you're doing the Lord's work in Washington, you have to return congressional phone calls. But again, he was a good man, and I came to admire him greatly, especially for the things he did after he left the White House. Ronald Reagan was a different kind of leader, but he was a leader. I think his great success lay in the fact that he knew who he was and he knew what he stood for, and he left the details to other people. Different in a way than any other person that I've known about who was president. Bill Clinton, I have to say, was the most disappointing politician I've ever known. I thought he had these great political skills. He was one of the most charming and affable people I've ever known. And yet he just sort of let it all fritter away because he couldn't control his personal life. He just didn't have the self-discipline to do it. I thought the first George Bush was a very good public servant. I don't think he was a very good politician, and I don't think he liked politics very much, and I think that's what sets him apart from his son, the current president, George Bush. This George Bush is a good politician. He likes to play the game, and he's very good at it. He's a very shrewd guy. He has some of the best political antenna that I've ever seen, and I've kind of enjoyed watching him and watching how, what he has brought to the presidency.
Do you think it's unfair that particularly comedians are so harsh sometimes in their humor against George W. Bush?
Well, we kind of forget. I mean, I think that's part of being the presidency. They are not nearly as hard on him as the comedians were on Gerald Ford, who was one of the, as far as physical shape, was in better physical shape than any one of his age that I can recall, and I was a part of it. When he fell down those steps, we began to think of him as something of a stumble bum. I remember he was going around that Nelson Rockefeller as vice president. They said he was one banana peel away from the presidency. I think President Ford got a bad rap. As far as has George Bush been treated unfairly, I think he is getting a bad rap in the sense that he sometimes as we all are, late in the evening when we're tired. We don't ad-lib as well as we could. And I think he's not a great ad-libber. But this business that he is not well read, that he is not smart, is just not true. I can remember before he was even governor of Texas, going to baseball games with him here, because I knew him pretty well because he and my brother were partners in the Texas Rangers, of course. He was always talking about some book he had just read. He's a very bright fellow, and these things that he's not smart, it's just not correct. There are times when he is not very articulate, but I always found him a very smart, very clued in, and very shrewd individual.
What do you think will be the outcome of the Iraqi situation?
I must say I think it's pretty much in the hands of Saddam Hussein. The president left himself very little wiggle room in his State of the Union message when he said he must disarm or we intend to disarm him. Now the thing to know about this president is he's pretty much what you see is what you get. He's not an extremely complicated person. He pretty much, when he says it, you can believe it. I mean, that's my observation of him over the years. I believe, Bobbie, that there is still a faint hope. It's faint, but there's still some hope within the administration that Saddam Hussein may leave voluntarily. But I think we know one thing for sure. He's not going to do anything unless he believes he has no alternative. And I think that's part of what this big buildup is all about. I think you'll continue to see this buildup take place. I think you'll continue to see stories leaked explaining that when we do go in, that it will be with devastating and overwhelming force. This will be something like we've never seen before in modern warfare, because we're capable of doing things that we just couldn't do in the past. So maybe his survival instincts will overtake his instincts to stay in place there, and I certainly hope that happens. If it does happen, if he does decide to go, I think we'll let him go.
What was your assessment of Colin Powell's speech to the UN?
I thought it was pretty compelling. I thought he laid out a pretty devastating case. I mean, when he's talking about the Iraqis faking death certificates to try to leave the impression that some of these scientists that we want to talk to are dead, when in fact they've just been hidden away. Why would they do that if they didn't have something to hide? I think some of those intercepted communications that we heard them talking about to things around and speaking in code words, I thought that was also pretty compelling. I think it is pretty hard right now to not be convinced that he is trying to build weapons of mass destruction, and that if he gets them, he might indeed use them. Now, whether that justifies going to war, that's what the debate will be all about. I think you'll continue to see some in the Congress say, let's do it in conjunction with the rest of the United Nations. But I thought he laid out a pretty devastating case against Saddam Hussein.
Bob, is there still something in broadcast journalism you haven't done that you're dying to do?
No, I really can't say that there is. I mean, I've had the chance to cover most of the big stories, and you know, I have now the best job in all of broadcast journalism, I think, as the moderator of Face the Nation. I mean, this is the one place I don't even have to go looking for the newsmakers. They come to me now, and that's the great part of this job, is getting to talk to the people who make the news.
Well, Bob, this has been a great day for me, getting to visit with you again. Again, congratulations on your book, This Just In.
It wouldn't have happened without you, Bobbie. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bob, I've always said that you were a journalist. Bob, I've always said that you were a broadcast journalist just waiting to be discovered. Taking the presidents that you have covered, Bob, give me just taking the presidents that you have covered, give me just a sentence or two of your impressions of each one. What are you most proud of as far as your career is concerned? Let's see. like Don Hewitt, are you going to retire at 80? Do you think that comedians, particularly, are too hard on George W. Bush? What do you think will be the outcome of this Iraqi situation? Okay, now let me just do some reactions. Okay. You can talk about anything if you want to. Okay.
Well, that was good. That was an interesting interview. I sincerely believe that there is a chance that this war might not happen. The president always has the news anchors in on the day of the State of the Union message, has us all to lunch, and it's really nice, and it has to be on background. You can't quote him, but he said that. I mean, he said he believed that there was still a chance. He didn't think it was much of a chance, but they're going to do it. I mean, if he doesn't disarm or leave, they're going to go right in there, and whether the UN approves it or not. But I think they'll try to get some sort of UN resolution before they do it, which I hope they do. I think it'll be a lot better if they do that. But the really worrisome thing now is what happens in North Korea, what they're going to do. I mean, that guy is crazy. I mean, well, Saddam Hussein is crazy, but this guy in North Korea is even crazier, I think. Yeah. The good news for us is that he doesn't have a missile that can hit this country, but he sure has one that can hit South Korea. And I think that's what they're so worried about, that if we made any move against him, he just launches this missile against one of these things against South Korea. So it's a very dicey situation.
Okay, Nifty,